so much for joining me here on Who's Behind the Headline.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to have you here because, we connected and learning about your story, I felt like it was a very powerful story. I felt like it was a story that, more people than we probably even think of can actually connect. But I think sometimes when people are going through what you went through, they feel very alone. They don't really know where to turn. They might feel like they're being a burden from even asking these questions. So, I found like there was a lot of strength in your story, and I just am very excited to help you share it. I wanted to go back before the headline and just ask you, you know, thinking back before you were diagnosed, talk to me a little bit about what was life like for you at that time.
It's a great question. So, before I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer, I had three kids. And colon cancer grows slowly over time. So it's possible that I had it. There's no like definitive date that they can say you started having cancer on this date, but
Right.
so you see those symptoms grow over time. So it's possible that that started growing somewhere probably between my second and third child being born. So it was a particularly difficult time period. I had babies, and babies are exhausting. And often the first real symptom that folks typically experience with colorectal cancer diagnoses is fatigue. I'm here to say that if you go to a doctor and you have three small children and an infant, to say that you're tired, they're going to be like, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
So is everyone else who has a baby. So it was pretty hard to differentiate between what was just normal stuff for that season of my life and what was extraordinary. And I remember really sharing this with a lot of people, after the fact, because hindsight is much clearer often. But that I often felt like there was something wrong with me. So I would push my body farther because I saw other moms, and other moms were able to do X, Y, and Z. So why couldn't I? Or why did I need to come home and rest for so long or so
Right.
intensely? So I often, convinced myself inside that there was something wrong with me, or rather than a physical problem. And it really led to a lot of distrust in my body. And I had to relearn how to trust my body after my diagnosis, when all of that kind of came together and made more sense. But so originally, anemia was the first like diagnosable symptom that I had beyond fatigue. And it's very closely related to fatigue, right?
Yeah.
So, and it was, difficult again because I was, in my late 20s, early 30s. And when I talked to doctors about the anemia, they would say, well, you're menstruating and maybe you have heavier cycles, and, all of that's pretty typical. So take some iron supplements and that should help. And, make sure to rest if you're tired, which is easier said than done when you have a bunch of little ones.
Yeah.
So those were originally my only symptoms. It wasn't until things kind of got probably to around the midpoint of likely having my tumor growing inside of me that I started to feel a lot of pressure or pain in my right quadrant of my body where the tumor would eventually be found. I remember often talking to doctors when I was in for other things and saying, yeah, I get this like pressure or pain sensation. And they'd say, you don't really feel pain in that area very often, so it's probably something else and it's just referred, or, it was just fairly dismissed often. I did have a couple of times where doctors were concerned enough or the pain was severe enough that I went to the emergency room, or I had sought out a doctor's appointment specifically for that, and they had done CT scans
Okay.
to check for a problem. So that's, a pretty serious imaging tool to look inside your body. And a lot of people don't know this, and I didn't know this until after I had been treated for cancer. But CT scans are not great at finding tumors inside of your colon, even if they're quite large. Like mine was softball size, but it
Yeah.
just was not a great tool for finding that. That's why colonoscopies are so invaluable. So those scans came back normal. There was no reason to be concerned. My blood work, other than the anemia, seemed fine. And things kind of just carried on. At one point, I remember I was losing hair. Like my hair was breaking off. I had
Wow.
much longer curls at the time, and I remember looking in the mirror one day and I was like, why is like chunks of my hair just broken off like midway through the shaft of hair? And I thought, that's wild. And again, I saw a hairstylist and she's like, it's probably fatigue, or we all explain all these things away,
Yeah.
but it,
Can I ask you,
yeah.
why do you think that it wasn't taken as seriously? Do you think it was because there are other symptoms that look similar? Do you think it's because of you were a woman and your age? Do you think it's because, doctors maybe just don't have the time to like talk to us and take us seriously? Because I think, a lot of us experience this, maybe not just, related to cancer, but sometimes we feel like, we're the only ones advocating for ourselves when we're sitting in that doctor's office. So why were you not feeling heard?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's so many reasons. I mean, obviously, I think women's health being an issue was part of the problem. Feeling fairly dismissed about like cycles or the anemia bit, and just like recognizing that yes, people who are raising children are tired, but like they're if more time was taken, I think they could have maybe understood that the fatigue I was having was above and beyond what should have been expected in that season of life. And so I think that's definitely part of the problem. Another piece of the puzzle is health insurance is
Yeah.
an awful thing to have an impact like this on your hair. But the reality is that when I started asking and being concerned about a colonoscopy, I was told that if we do a colonoscopy and nothing is found, like there's no polyp, there's no problem, then you're going to have to pay for that. Like the insurance company is not going to want to foot the bill for that, and that could be $10,000, $20,000. Like it could be a lot of money, and so the doctors don't want to do that because what's the likelihood that a middle class American is going to be able to pay a bill like that? They want to get paid, the hospital wants to get paid, the insurance doesn't want to be, on the line for a test that they deem that's inappropriate for my age. So I think health insurance had a big part to do with it, and just like instilling fear in my provider who might have otherwise been like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, that could be it. Like, we should check.
Wow.
So I think there's a lot of contributing factors. I don't think it's any one clear thing, but just like a compilation of like all of these things. I was also like overweight, and so I think often going into a doctor's appointment, they saw my size rather than me as a person or my activity level, and just made assumptions that it was like, oh, well, she's overweight, so that's why she's tired. Like if she ate better or she was more fit, then this wouldn't be a problem. And so again, like just maybe not like the only sole reason, but like a contributing factor.
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, it sounds like kind of at the end of the day, it also comes down to just not asking, not going beyond those first questions, maybe like making assumptions or just not taking the time. So when you do finally get diagnosed, obviously like there's a lot of things that are coming at you at once. Like you never been a you never had cancer before. Like you never had to face this diagnosis before. So, what was it like for you? How did it change your life in those early days?
It was a significant experience. I would say easily the most traumatizing experience of my life was being diagnosed. I'm usually a pretty level-headed person, and I can kind of take my emotional brain and hold on to it until I can get into a logical frame of mind. I felt like I was hit with like a lot of emotion immediately. It's embarrassing, and I actually even told my doctor months and months after my diagnosis that I was embarrassed about it, and I apologized. But when he told me that I had cancer, in the movies, you're always sitting at like a desk and you're dressed, and he's giving you this bad news with your loved ones around you. I was in a hospital gown. I still had my IV hooked up, and
Mhm.
it was nothing like I expected something like that to happen, and I think I used the phrase scream cried. I was just like,
Yeah.
no, like this cannot be my reality. I'm 36, and the second thing that I said was, I have a 6-year old, as if he would be like, well, if you have a 6-year old, then just kidding, like we'll give the cancer to someone else. Like it just, I don't know, it was very illogical time, and I'd never struggled with significant mental illness. I'd never had a panic attack. I'd never experienced something
Yeah.
like that. And for the first time in my life, I was having all of that. Like I didn't, it was difficult to breathe. Sometimes I felt like I was having a heart attack for no reason. And it took a little while to work out that that was an emotional response and that like my body was manifesting these physical symptoms. Sometimes I would almost be convinced that I could feel tumors like growing in my body, and they weren't there. It was just like my I was
Yeah.
afraid. So it was just incredibly isolating. That's, I think, the word that comes back to me most when I think back on that time. I didn't know anybody where I lived that was my age that had cancer. I didn't know how to talk to people about it. I often say I wish they had given me the diagnosis and then like a how-to manual when they sent me
Yeah.
home, because they just tell you and then they say, we'll see you in like 6 weeks with a plan. And it's like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to tell my children or my parents or like, what is the right thing? What is the next right thing? I don't know what that is anymore. And so you just kind of feel like you're making it up as you go along, and it's scary, and it was mostly isolating. So that was a new thing for me, was trying to learn how to connect with people so that I felt a little less alone in that.
Yeah. I hear, sometimes cancer survivors say that it's almost like everything became a worry or anxiety. Like if you were to get a flu, or if you were to get COVID, or going to the gym, like that even felt like an anxiety because you're more exhausted, just even maybe getting to the car. Did you kind of talk a little bit about that, and maybe like how did you overcome that for people that are listening that are dealing with this right now, or is it a work in progress and you're still still having to work through it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, that kind of happened after I'd completed my treatments, my surgery, my chemotherapy, and at that point, I was in survivorship. There was no evidence of disease in my body, and you're kind of sent off into the world. And at that point, like as soon as I finished treatment, COVID kind of struck the world, and so everyone was literally isolated, and that's when I started to have those feelings where it was like every twinge in your body, you were like, oh my gosh, cancer is back. Or because again, like that distrust that I had in my body, like I had ignored so many things for so long and I didn't know how
Right.
to listen to my body. I had to relearn all of that and really learn like what is important. It was very helpful to be able to talk to my oncologist, who I became very close with, and I really felt like he was a wonderful provider for me. And he gave me a little tip that I've held on to a lot over the years, which is that cancer is always the same or worsening. And so if you have something that feels bad one moment and then it gets a little bit better, that's probably not cancer, because it's going to stay the same or get worse. And so that kind of helped me throughout the years to kind of calm that part of my brain, from kind of being in overdrive or hyperactive, worrying about disease. But I would say survivorship was a lot harder than I expected, and maybe even harder than treatment in a lot of ways, because it's all mental. I mean, there are some physical side effects that are lasting, but mostly it's like a mental game of like trying to not live in a place of fear. And that was tricky. And when I was first diagnosed, I would wake up many times a night, and just that moment, almost like when you lose somebody that's close to you and you wake up, there's a moment where you don't remember that they're gone. And then it kind of all hits you, and it takes a while for the shock of that to like become normal in your brain. It's the same thing, because getting diagnosed with cancer is a loss. And so I had the same experiences. I would wake up many times a night and have to reface this reality. And if you'd asked me, in September and October of 2019 when I was diagnosed, would there ever be a day or a time that I wouldn't be thinking about cancer? I would say no, like it will always be like this. I could not see how it wouldn't be always lurking in the corner. And maybe it is to some extent, but there are times that I completely forget. There's days or weeks. I work in a cancer related field, so I get reminded of cancer often because of the work I choose to engage in. But if
Right.
I didn't do that, I think I would go very long stretches of time without thinking about it. And so that's something I always share with people who are recently diagnosed, that like I know it doesn't feel that way right now, but that there is something on the other side of this. There is hope that it's not going to be something that consumes your ever waking thoughts and nightmares. And sometimes it just takes time and connection and finding things in your toolkit that work to help ease that, because it is a really significant thing.
Yeah. And I think too, I think you are 100% valid in that feeling. I think any of us would feel that way. And, your age at the time, where you were in your life, having 3 kids, continuing to have more kids, it's very overwhelming. And not only are you hit with, the news of having cancer, but like you said, like the payment, the cost of everything, and the fact that you still have kids to raise. It's a lot to deal with. You were talking a little bit about the isolation that also comes with it too, just feeling like no one really understands, or who do you turn to ask questions. Where did you find that community? Have you found something that has been helpful for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I did. I was in Facebook world, I guess, when I first was looking for that because I live in rural southwestern Virginia, and I was like, I cannot drive an hour and a half to get to a support group. Like, I feel like I already don't have enough time with my family as it is, and maybe much shorter if I have this disease that progresses. And also, I had seen the people at my infusion center, and they were all like 80 plus years old. And I don't mind 80-year-olds, I think they're really awesome people. But I also was like, I don't want to be the only person in the room that looks and is facing the things in my life, in this season of my life right now. And so I was looking on social media to see if there were some support groups that would be available there. And I did find some. Originally, they weren't great though. It was a lot of, if you posted something or you had a question, you just got like a lot of thoughts and prayers comments. And I really wanted my questions answered. I had legitimate questions. Like, I didn't understand why my doctor was not recommending me for radiation. And my parents were asking me, and I was like, I don't know. I had so many questions and I ran out of time and I didn't ask him that, and I don't want to bother him because I've already bothered him like 10 times this week. So I would ask questions like that, and I would kind of just get, oh, thoughts and prayers, I don't know. And I was like, this isn't super helpful to me. And someone in one of those groups, and I don't know who it was, but I'm forever grateful for them, they said, I think you need something a little bit more. You need something that has like more of a learning or a scientific piece to it. And they had recommended an organization called Colon Town. And they said this is a group that kind of focuses on hope and science and support and education. I think you might like it. And so I joined Colon Town, which was also based on Facebook at the time. And I felt like immediately like I had found the people that were going to help me through this. There were so many people in my situation in life that I was able to connect with. There were parents there, there were younger people there were people who had my kind of diagnosis and the part of the colon where my tumor was found. There were so many things, there were so many resources to help me. Like, there was this list of questions to ask your oncologist and all kinds of resources, and I just felt immediately like supported in a way that I had not experienced in the weeks previous to that since my diagnosis. And so to me, that I found Colon Town a couple of weeks after my surgery, and that to me marked like a new hopeful period of my experience, where I felt like I could ask questions and get the answers that I needed and the support that I needed. And I actually eventually became a volunteer with that organization, and today I'm actually director of operations and finance for the nonprofit that manages that program. So it's an organization that I have a lot of passion for, and I've chosen again to like work in this field where we do education and support for colorectal cancer patients and caregivers because it meant so much to me, and I know it means a lot to other people, and I just want to continue supporting that work. So that is an immensely important part of that story and for me.
I want to ask you just very quickly, and then I'll move on to something else. But have you met, since starting this journey, have you met other people close to your age that were also diagnosed with colon cancer?
Yeah, so it's not super common to meet people my age who are diagnosed with colorectal cancer. It happens, it's happening unfortunately more and more often. So I did connect with a lot of people through Colon Town that were in my age. Colon Town was organized so that there's these different neighborhoods for all different kinds of things. So there's a parents one, and there's one for young people who are diagnosed, and all of those things. So I was able to kind of segment and find people that were experiencing really like the same kind of seasons in life that I had been experiencing. And so that helped a lot with the feelings of isolation. And then I also connected with other people, friends from college that were diagnosed maybe with other kinds of cancer. And honestly, I think the reason I pushed so hard the summer I was diagnosed to get a colonoscopy was because had a couple of friends from high school and college who had gotten colon cancer and had passed away. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, how is that even possible? Like, maybe I should take this. I eventually had a symptom of like blood in the stool. And I was like,
Yeah.
maybe that's a symptom I need to like really push harder on because maybe it's not just hemorrhoids and that's worth, investigating. I'm really glad. I'm very sad that those friends of mine passed away and were not able to get to a point where their disease was controlled. But I'm also so grateful that they and their family members shared about that publicly because that is inevitably what pushed me to get an examination that was able to diagnose me.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like it's everyone else is telling you you're fine, right? And it's
Right.
like especially I think as women, like we have so many things that go on with our bodies where we are just like we'll push through no matter what because I'm
Yep.
like I don't know if this is a stomach cramp, if these are period cramps or what's going on, but just constantly pushing through. Even women will push through heart attacks just thinking it's,
Yeah.
some type of chest burn or something. So it happens. And I could totally see how, people would just continue to ignore the signs and years can go by as happened in your case. Talk to me, I know that you feel like research backed treatments really made the difference in your case and ultimately saved your life. Talk to me a little bit about that, some of the treatments that helped you and kind of what are you fighting for now for other people?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting and because I was a lower stage patient, I did not have to lean so heavily on some of the really impressive stuff that's going on in the field of medical science that has to do with these clinical trials that are going on and immunotherapies and other opportunities that are opening up for people. And I'm excited to see those becoming available. But I did experience a few things that I think really made a difference in my care. And would they have like changed whether I survived or not? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to like predict the future, right?
Yeah.
But I definitely know that it improved my quality of life and made a difference in my care. So a few things I was able to my surgery would have previously often been done laparoscopically or been even an open surgery, which is a substantial trauma to the body and takes a long time to recover from and is quite painful. But I was able to receive my surgery in Roanoke from a wonderful doctor who utilized the Da Vinci robot to do the operation. And I'd had other abdominal surgeries, either giving birth or I had a gallbladder removed many years previous, and comparatively, this was a much more involved and serious operation. But it was so much easier to recover from. I had, almost no complications whatsoever. I was in and out of the hospital in like 36 hours, which I just thought was amazing. I had like very little pain. Like when I got home, I was really just taking Tylenol for the pain or Motrin. I didn't have to use any opioids even in the hospital. I mean, all of that felt like a miracle to me. There was a couple of other things that really made a difference that had come out of recent research. So previous to my diagnosis, anyone in like the stage 3 range of cancer, of colorectal cancer, would receive a treatment regimen called Folfox. And it was pretty intense. People who've had that can give some pretty terrifying horror stories. Like it's a pretty rough chemotherapy to experience, and it lasts for 6 months, and it's just a long time. And I was expecting, my surgeon had told me I would need chemotherapy and referred me to oncology. He said that's what you're going to have because he didn't even know that the standard of care had recently changed. It had been so recent that he had not even received notification of that. So there had been a lot of research over the previous years on different chemotherapy options for people with my staging of the disease. And there was a new chemotherapy regimen called Capox that I was able to receive, and it was only 4 cycles, so I only had to have 4 chemotherapy infusions, and it only lasted for 3 months, and it was intense at times, and there was definitely some like not very glorious moments in my chemotherapy experience, but I know that it could have been so much worse. And really, one of the main things is a lot of folks who receive Folfox have permanent neuropathy in their hands and feet. And, I know people who are permanently disabled and cannot walk because of that. And I don't have those symptoms. I'm able to hike with my kids and spend time outside and run around at the zoo or travel, and I don't have any of those permanent side effects, and that feels like such a blessing in my life. And I feel really grateful for the scientists who engaged, really the scientists who are willing to like further science and help those who need more options, and also scientists who help improve the options that are currently available, because in a lot of ways some of these treatments are pretty barbaric, and I think they know that, and they're trying to find ways to minimize some of that. Another treatment that I was able to utilize that was pretty new at the time and is becoming more and more mainstream was a ctDNA blood test. And this was to check for what they call is it's minimal residual disease. And so they're looking for little pieces of DNA that have sloughed off of tumors that might be hiding in your body after you
Oh,
think the cancer is gone. And so that really helped with my mental state too, like being able to get those blood tests regularly and seeing that they were negative. And while that wasn't like, 100% backed yet by like clinical trials and studies, there was good data to suggest that that combined with regular scans and blood work, that I could pretty have a pretty high confidence that I didn't have cancer growing in my body, that I wasn't going to have a recurrence. And that helped me to just take care of my mental state a little bit as well. So because of those experiences, which again I think are very minimal compared to like something that someone with like a very rare type of cancer or like stage 4 disease or like straight, difficult biomarkers to treat might have a more passionate story to tell about that. But because I had those experiences, I'm really passionate about research funding. And I think it's super important that we be putting money towards that end. I came to Washington to advocate for that this week. And I know so many people who are dependent upon that, friends and family members and people that I know through my support group, that their lives are depending on innovations in these fields to continue. And I just feel like the least we can ask of our lawmakers is to keep up with the cost of inflation, to continue funding these research projects. So, when I met with Congress people earlier this week, I was really asking for the highest possible increases for the NIH and the NCI and other programs that will help these people, because I know what it's like to be sitting there and afraid and wondering what's coming around the corner, and knowing that I'm not a scientist. I can't go out and solve that problem for myself, and I'm dependent on other people to do that work, and that it's the matter of life and death for a lot of people.
yeah, definitely. But if you feel comfortable, I just would like to know, like, and I don't know if you even can speak for them, but what do you think this has been like for your family? Oh, it's not easy to see mom with cancer. And maybe what are some of the things that you think has helped you guys all just remain positive and um proactive?
It's a good question. As I've talked to my kids, we had 3 biological kids when I was diagnosed, and we've since adopted 3 other children.
Okay.
And so we have a large family, and the big thing for us is we communicate. We maybe over communicate sometimes. I'm not sure. We're not professional parents. We're just doing our best parents, I guess.
Yeah.
There's no real rules with cancer. There's a lot of people who keep a lot of that private, and they don't share a lot with their children. And I think I'm on the other end of the spectrum, that when I found out I was diagnosed, we didn't know what to do, and I just felt like they're going to see me crying, they're going to see me, my behavior is already different. Like, I didn't want them to be worried and not understand why. So we decided to tell them right away, and I still don't know if that was the right thing to do or not, but it felt right in the moment, so we went ahead and did that. They were little, and I don't even think they knew what cancer was or really what that meant. And so when I asked them what they wanted to do after I told them, I cried a good deal, and they were like, maybe we should have chocolate cake and watch a movie. So we did. And even
Like, that
on,
makes me feel better too.
yeah, I was like, I don't have a better idea, so why
Right.
not? And honestly, every year on the anniversary of that day, we have chocolate cake and watch a movie, because that was not the worst idea I've ever heard. So we've really involved the kids in whatever aspect felt comfortable to them and made sense for us. And if they had questions, they were able to do that. If they wanted to There was strange things like I had a port that was installed where I would receive chemotherapy and blood work through in my chest, and it's this little knobbly bit that kind of protrudes out of your chest a little, and my son became very attached to it. He would sit on my lap and he loved to rub my port. And so when I told him I was going to get removed, he would call it my tombstone. And I don't know why. He was little, he was 6. I told him my tombstone was going to get taken out because I didn't need it anymore. He was so sad. He wanted to know if the doctor would send it home with me so that he could have it. And I
Oh
was
my
like, "We'll
gosh.
get you something else. That's kind of a gross thing, so probably not."
Right.
You know, I was really worried that they would be ruined by like me having cancer. I was like, this isn't fair to them. Like, they didn't do anything to deserve this. Like, now they're gonna be the weird kid whose mom has cancer. I was really worried about how that would screw them up. But, the more I met and talked with people, it was like, it really came to be understood to me that like every kid has strange experiences that are unique to their life,
Yes.
and that those things can make you or break you depending on how you're guided through them. And so that it was not so much that they were having an experience that was unfair, but like how would we support them in that. And I feel like they are more empathetic and they're able to communicate with people about loss in a way that is fluent and easy for them. They're able to go to this beautiful program we found through Colin Town called Camp Kesem, that is for children who have a parent who is diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, wow.
So all of the kids at camp are children who have experienced chemotherapy and surgeries and radiation, and sometimes a lot of them have parents who have passed away, and it's just a beautiful, time for them to connect with other people who've had a shared life experience. And so I don't know. I don't know if I had a choice. I guess I wish they hadn't had that experience. I wish I hadn't had that experience, but we don't really get to control that part of it. But I think while I wouldn't wish for cancer for myself or anyone else, I think there were some really beautiful things that came from it. And the ways that it brought our family closer together and helped us prioritize on things that really mattered to us in life. I'm not sorry about those things for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I always like to ask about kids because I feel like sometimes people forget about kids, even because they're like sometimes, very young at the times where these things happen. But I know how much kids are sponges and how much they pick up. And I think it can be helpful to other people to hear that aspect and think, oh, maybe I wasn't thinking like, how my kid is taking this, or maybe we're not sharing, right? Maybe we're like holding everything back from my kid, and I notice my kid is starting to like ask me a lot of questions. Maybe I should be more honest. So that's why I love hearing your experience and how you've handled, a serious and scary topic, but it doesn't have to be the end of the world, right? It
Right.
seems like you guys have like, grown, and that camp that you're a part of sounds so amazing to have that connection. I feel like with a lot of people that speak with, because like you said, cancer can be like experiencing a loss, and I speak with a lot of parents who have lost their children. It's hard to feel like it's hard to feel settled, or it's hard to feel like anyone really knows what you're going through other than someone who knows exactly what you're going through.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. We adopted some of our kids through foster care, after I was in my survivorship. And it was interesting to come together as a family of kids who'd experienced hard things in their life outside of
Yeah.
our experience. And we had this cancer experience that they weren't part of. But really, like, the shared experience of navigating loss, like we were all fluent in that language. Like that's really
Yes.
something that brought us together. And again, it's like, wow, I never thought cancer would be something that brought like such wonderful people into my life, but I'm so grateful every day for these kids that are in our family. And I'm glad that I'm able to talk with them from this place of, yeah, we know bad things happen and we find a way through. And it's been beautiful to share, a lot of those experiences with them.
Well, you have a beautiful family.
Thank you.
I would ask you, maybe like one of my last things to ask you is what do you think someone with cancer needs, whether that's from like their family standpoint, other people, do they need space? Do they, I mean, I know everyone is different, but in your experience, what are some of the things that helped you stay strong and just be able to get through?
It's such a hard question. I mean, yes, so people need a lot of support. I had experiences where people assumed that I needed certain things or that I didn't need certain things. And those were honestly some of the hardest moments for me. So I often counsel people when they ask this question to not make assumptions about what somebody needs if they're because it could be different. My experience could be very different from your experience if you were to have that, and so just don't assume. Like, ask them, would it be more beneficial for me to help keep you guys fed, or would it be better if we did lawn work, or do you want none of that and you just want someone to come sit with you? My mom would often just like wrap me up in a blanket and make me go sit outside on the porch, and it was suddenly like easier to breathe outside, and she didn't really ask. She just did it and saw the need. And I had a lot of friends who they would ask, they would communicate and ask, but also they would recognize that like I was sometimes not in a place to know what I needed or to communicate or be able to figure out something for them to do. So they just they just watched and they learned and they acted. And I'm so grateful for those moments. And I still think about some of the really thoughtful and kind things that people did during that time period. But most of the time, the things that really made a difference were when people didn't assume that I wouldn't be able to do something or didn't assume that I needed a certain type of help, but they were just observant and present and willing to do whatever it was, even if it seemed strange, because you don't get to control how you feel or what you need in those moments. And really, that's like something I often say to folks that are navigating cancer life, is something that really helped me was just understanding that there's kind of two buckets in life. There's the things you can control, and there's the things you cannot control. And don't worry about the thing. I mean, it's easier said than done. Don't worry about
Yeah.
the things you can't control. But really, you can't. You can't. I cannot control if cancer mutates in my body. I can't control if it comes back. I can't control
Mhm.
so many things, but I can control other things. I can control how I move my body. I can control what I put inside it. I can control how I connect with other people. And I know that like the times when I felt that it was the hardest was when I was focused on the things I couldn't control. But when I focused on what I could control and maybe like getting outside of myself and helping somebody maybe who's in a even more difficult situation, those were the times where I really started to feel like I was better inside, whether physically or mentally or both.
No, definitely. I think that's so helpful. I notice when I'm like wallowing in that sadness or the anxiety, whatever I'm going through, it is often like taking yourself, outside of your situation, what you're going through. That just like sometimes helps you put things into perspective. And two, at the end of the day, we know deep down that it's better to not just sit there just worrying and stressing, even though if it's so difficult and it takes us a few years to get out of that initial, which is stage of grief. Like you said, you're going through grief, and grief has many stages. It's not linear. It comes back. It takes years. So even if, if we get off the phone and you have a panic attack, like that's just,
Exactly. And I keep a lot of things in my life so that when those moments creep up, I can say, okay, like where can I turn outward? Like, like an experience like this week. Can I go up to DC, or can I write a letter to my congressperson, or can I connect with somebody I know
yeah.
who's not feeling well right now? Or, it's hard, but there are ways to find unique opportunities to connect with people in life and to turn outside of yourself. And it really does make a difference. But you do have to be gentle and careful with yourself, because it's a hard thing to go through and navigate cancer, and balancing that is important.
Yeah. Well, okay, one last question. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but I will let you go. Just one last question. If you could like look back at yourself, if we could like go back in time and you could sit and hold your hand, the day that you were diagnosed, with what you know now and, all that you've overcome now, like what would you say to yourself?
I have thought about that many times, and I often have said that I remember when I was slowly waking up from my colonoscopy, and I had had some previous procedures where I'd had a scope in my throat and my stomach, again, like checking for problems, but they never thought it would be colon cancer, so they never checked the other end. So I'd woken up from a similar operation or procedure before, and the nurses were always noisy and laughing, and it was very jovial atmosphere. But when I woke up from this one, it was like silent. Like nobody was in there except for the anesthesiologist, and he's like, "You can sleep as long as you want." Like no one was trying to wake me up or get me out of there. And I remember thinking like something is not right about this. Like something's different. And I've often thought like if I had the magical powers to go
Right.
to myself in that moment, I would just like climb into bed with me and just say, there's going to be a thing that happens and it's going to be super scary and difficult, but like it's not going to be as bad as you think it is. Like the chemotherapy isn't going to be as hard, the surgery is going to be easier than you thought. All of these wonderful people in your life are going to show up and do make you feel less alone. Like you are going to be connected with some of the most amazing people that you've ever met in your life, and like it's going to be okay. Because I think I often go to like the worst possible scenario. So I think if I could go back in time, I would just kind of whisper in my own ear that it's sometimes not as bad as you think it is, and it's going to be okay in the end.
Well, thank you so much for taking this time to speak with me and share these things. I know they're not easy to talk about, but I just think it's so powerful sharing your story. And I really know that you are going to help so many people from the advocating that you're doing in DC, also by sharing your story, also in your personal life with taking in children. Like, it just sounds like, you are a truly amazing person. So thank you.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate you speaking with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to talk with you, and I just hope that, other people who are going through this, that they can find some peace and some ease, because it is a hard thing. So I appreciate you doing this and putting it out into the world.